Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping straight into, well, the architecture of political power. We're looking at a big fight in California. It's all about who gets to draw those crucial district lines. This deep dive focuses on California's Proposition 50. It's heading for the ballot in November 2025.
Yeah, and this one is, let's say, complex but really important. Our listeners sent in some sources that, they really get to the heart of this conflict.
Right.
The big question is, should the state legislature temporarily get back the power to draw congressional maps, power that voters very deliberately took away from them not that long ago?
So our mission today, unpack that history, how California reformed redistricting, and then really dig into the arguments, the detailed points, both for and against this proposed temporary shift.
Exactly. And to really grasp Prop 50, we have to start with the basics, how districts get made in the first place.
Okay.
So every 10 years, right after the U.S. Census counts everyone, district lines have to be redrawn. It's about making sure representation is, well, fair. That process is called redistricting.
But that process, it's been notoriously manipulated over the years, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. For centuries, really. That manipulation has a name: gerrymandering. It's when those district lines are drawn, sometimes into these really bizarre shapes.
Yeah, you see those maps, sometimes they look like cartoons.
Exactly. And it's done for one reason: to skew election results, usually to help one party or protect the people already in office.
The sources you looked at highlight two kind of classic tactics for this. They're technical terms, but pretty easy to picture: packing and cracking.
That's right. Let's take packing first. Imagine you've got a big group of voters, and they mostly support the other party. Packing means you draw the lines to cram as many of them as possible into just one district.
So that district becomes a massive win for the opposition.
Right, a landslide. But all those extra votes, they're essentially wasted. They don't help elect anyone in the districts next door.
Got it. And cracking is the flip side.
Pretty much. If you can't pack them, crack them. You take that same group of voters and you slice them up, spreading them thinly across, say, 5 different districts.
So they end up being a minority in every single one of those districts.
Exactly. They can't form a majority anywhere. It just dilutes their voting power across the board. Both methods distort the actual level of support a party has.
It's pure political engineering, really. Undermines the whole idea that every vote should count equally.
Fundamentally. Which brings us to California's attempt to fix this. They basically got fed up.
So voters took action. They used the ballot box to take the drawing power away from the politicians themselves. Let's talk about that fix.
Yeah, this wasn't a quick fix. It was a big deal, happened in stages. First came Proposition 11 back in 2008.
Okay.
Then voters followed up with Proposition 20 in 2010. And together, these two created something pretty unique at the time: the Citizens Redistricting Commission, the CRC.
An independent body. And its job was drawing the lines for both the state legislature and for California's seats in the U.S. Congress. That was a huge shift, right? California used to have some notoriously gerrymandered maps.
Oh, some of the worst. So the core idea behind the CRC was simple, almost a slogan. Voters should choose their politicians, not the other way around.
Politicians choosing their voters, that's the gerrymandering problem in a nutshell.
Exactly. And, the research we looked at suggests this model, well, it actually worked pretty well in California. After the CRC drew maps following the 2010 census, there was a noticeable increase in competitive districts.
And that's a key measure, isn't it? Competitive districts mean real elections, not foregone conclusions.
Right. It suggests the nonpartisan approach led to fairer maps, less predictability, more actual contests. It seemed like the reform delivered what it promised.
Stability, transparency
Right.
for over a decade.
Yeah, exactly. But now, along comes Proposition 50, challenging that very stability.
Okay, so let's dive into the main event. Proposition 50, coming up in 2025. It's asking voters to make a temporary change to the system they themselves put in place.
And this is where we need to be super clear, because the timing is, frankly, odd. Prop 50 is talking about mid-cycle redistricting, not waiting for the next census.
Mid-cycle, meaning?
Meaning, if it passes this November, the state legislature, the politicians' voters, deliberately sidelined, would immediately take over drawing California's congressional district maps.
Wow, okay. And these new maps would be used when?
Right away, starting with the 2026 elections, which raises the big question you flagged: why now? We're 4 years away from the 2030 census count and the normal redistricting cycle.
Yeah, what's the rationale given in the sources?
Well, proponents talk about needing flexibility to respond to shifting conditions. It's a bit vague, but the implication seems to be less about population shifts within California.
But more about...
More about the national political landscape. Other states have used mid-cycle redistricting, often seen as partisan moves. So the argument goes, if the national playing field is changing in ways that hurt California's influence, maybe due to court rulings elsewhere or actions by other states, California needs the ability to react quickly.
So it's framed almost like a defensive measure to protect California's interests in Congress against what other states might be doing.
That seems to be the core justification, and they stress heavily that this is temporary. Control goes right back to the independent CRC after the 2030 census data is out. That sunset clause is baked in.
Okay, that's crucial. And let's also be clear about what Prop 50 doesn't do. It's not completely dismantling the CRC, right?
No, absolutely not. The sources are clear on this. Prop 50 does not abolish the Citizens Redistricting Commission. The CRC would keep its power over state legislative districts, Board of Equalization districts, things like that.
So it's specifically targeting the congressional maps, the ones that decide California's voice in Washington, D.C.
Exactly. It's surgical in that sense.
And even if the legislature draws these maps, they still have rules to follow. It's not just a blank check.
That's another vital point, yes. Any maps the legislature draws must still comply with federal law, like the Voting Rights Act. Protections against racial gerrymandering, requirements for equal population, those still apply. The basic fairness rules remain. It's the map drawer who changes.
Okay, so the history is clear, the mechanism's clear, but the politics here, this feels like it's really about trust, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Weighing that CRC stability against this idea of legislative flexibility.
That's exactly where the battle lines are drawn. Let's look at the arguments for Prop 50 first. Supporters say this change is about fairness and responsiveness.
Flexibility is the key word they use.
Right. Their core argument is that in today's, fast-moving political world, the state needs to be able to react decisively and quickly.
And they feel the CRC, being this independent, deliberative body, is just too slow. If there's some kind of political emergency or, like you said, an aggressive move by another state that impacts California's representation.
That's the claim. They argue the legislature, being, a political body, has the agility needed for that kind of rapid response to protect California's clout in Congress.
And they keep hammering the temporary aspect.
Constantly. It's framed not as grabbing power back permanently, but more like borrowing the keys for a short, specific emergency trip. The 2030 Sunset Clause is their proof that they respect the voters' long-term decision for an independent commission.
There's also that interesting symbolic piece in the measure, isn't there? Something about national reform.
Yeah, it's quite clever politically. They included language calling on the U.S. Congress to actually require independent commissions nationwide.
Huh. So they're saying, look, we believe in independent commissions for everyone, eventually.
But right now, in this specific, maybe unfair national environment, we need this temporary tool to defend ourselves. And by pushing for a national standard, we're actually strengthening democracy overall. It's a way to frame a potentially partisan move as part of a bigger pro-democracy goal.
Okay. But the opponents of Prop 50, they see this very differently. Their argument seems rooted in risk and, breaking trust.
Completely. Opponents hit hard on the idea that this weakens the independent commission that voters explicitly created to stop politicians from drawing their own districts.
Their point is, if the whole reason for the CRC was to remove partisan influence,
then handing the pen back to the politicians, even just for congressional maps and just for a few years, is basically inviting that partisan influence right back in. It undermines the entire principle.
And hold on, if the CRC, as you mentioned, actually led to more competitive districts, why should voters believe this is purely about defense and not just a chance for the party in power in Sacramento to draw safer seats for their own members?
That's the core of the skepticism. Opponents argue that giving the legislature this power, even with legal guardrails, inevitably opens the door to bias, protecting incumbents, and the kind of political gamesmanship Propositions 11 and 20 were designed to prevent. The process itself loses integrity, they say.
And the biggest worry for them seems to be the precedent it sets.
Yes, that's a huge concern, they ask. If the legislature can successfully argue for taking back this power once, even temporarily, what's to stop them from trying again later, maybe in 2032 or 2042, citing some other crisis or need for flexibility?
So even if it really is temporary this time, the act itself, creates a pathway for future attempts to override the voters' will.
That's the fear, that this one temporary change could permanently damage public confidence in the fairness of California's elections. It reverses the progress made, even if just for one cycle. The potential long-term cost to trust, they argue, outweighs any short-term political gain or flexibility.
Okay, so let's connect the dots. Why should you, the listener, the voter, care deeply about this seemingly internal political fight over map drawing?
Well, because these maps aren't just lines on paper, they determine who represents California in the U.S. Congress, and that has huge downstream effects.
Right. It impacts federal funding for everything: roads, schools, environmental projects. It affects national policy debates, military decisions. Basically, California's influence on everything the federal government does. This vote touches all of that.
So let's walk through the potential outcomes. If Prop 50 passes,
Then the state legislature redraws the congressional maps for the 2026 election. That could very well change the partisan balance of California's delegation in D.C.
and beyond just party control, it could affect how communities are represented. Are communities of interest kept together, giving them a stronger voice? Or are they cracked to dilute their influence? The legislature's priorities might differ significantly from the CRC's on that front, potentially favoring incumbents over community cohesion.
Okay, and if Prop 50 fails?
Then the system stays as it is. The Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission keeps control over congressional maps, just like it did after the 2020 census. The status quo, based on those voter initiatives from 2008 and 2010, remains intact.
So when you boil it all down, Proposition 50 really forces voters to answer a fundamental question about trust, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Do you trust the legislature more right now to navigate the current political climate and draw fair congressional maps, even if temporarily? Or do you trust the independent commission structure that voters previously established to keep politicians out of the process entirely?
Is that core tension? The desire for maybe political speed and adaptability versus the stability and nonpartisanship promised by the Independent Commission.
That conflict efficiency versus structure, maybe agility versus integrity, that's really the heart of what voters need to weigh before they decide on Prop 50.
Well, that's our deep dive into Proposition 50. The sources clearly lay out a state wrestling with a difficult choice: how to protect its interests in a turbulent national scene without undermining its own hard-won democratic reforms.
And maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to consider as you mull this over. The CRC was created because voters believe politicians shouldn't pick their voters. If voters now agree to let the legislature temporarily take back that power, even citing necessity, what's the long-term impact on how people perceive the fairness of elections in California? Does granting this exception, even for just 4 years, make it easier to argue for legislative control again down the road? That precedent question is worth thinking hard about before November 2025.